The laughter around the table was warm, almost rehearsed. Silverware chimed against porcelain, glasses caught the glow of candlelight, and then Diane leaned back, one hand on her stomach, the other reaching for Roger's. "I'm pregnant," she said, pausing just long enough to look at me. "The family's growing." The room erupted in gasps and congratulations, like a scene from a play everyone had practiced. Except me. Eyes turned, waiting for me to break, to collapse, to fall apart. But I didn't. I lifted my glass instead, smiled a smile that wasn't real, and decided they wouldn't get what they came for. My name is Brenda. I'm 34, and I've already cried all my tears. Alone. If you believe silence can speak louder than words, subscribe to Revenge with Suzi. It helps me reach more people, and keeps me going to bring you more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, would you have done anything differently? The announcement didn't surprise me. Not really. By the time Diane's words filled the room, I had already lived through my own collapse weeks earlier. Alone, behind closed doors. It started with something small. A late-night glow on Roger's phone, a message that lit up the screen just long enough for me to see her name. Diane. I told myself it could be innocent. Sisters-in-law text about errands, family dinners, birthdays. But not at midnight. Not with emojis I'd never seen him use with me. I didn't confront him that night. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing as if it could tell me the truth. The next morning, Diane came by. Too cheerful, too polished. She laughed at a joke only Roger would know. And when she reached for his arm, she didn't flinch. She wanted me to notice. I remember thinking, she's not even hiding it. Later that week, at my mother's house, Diane leaned against the counter while I poured coffee. She smirked and said, "Roger's been such a help lately. You must be so grateful." The words stung more than they should have. She wanted them to. I didn't answer. I just placed her cup on the counter a little too firmly and walked away. Silence has its own kind of weight, heavier than shouting. That's when I knew. Not just the affair, though that was obvious now, but the envy that had always lived under Diane's skin. The way she looked at my house, my marriage, my life, as if it had been hers all along, stolen from her. I thought about the years I had defended her, the times I'd brushed off her sharp comments, excused her bitterness. Maybe I believed it was my job to protect her, to absorb her jealousy so she wouldn't have to drown in it. But that night, lying next to Roger again, I realized I had been wrong. She wasn't drowning. She was swimming straight toward me, smiling, while I let the tide pull me under. So I started watching, quietly, closely, waiting for the next shadow to show itself. Envy doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it smiles, and sometimes it sits across from you at the kitchen table, drinking from your cup, pretending it's hers. Diane had always been the younger one, the brighter one in my parents' eyes. She was the free spirit, the one who just needed a little more help. I was the steady one, reliable, invisible in my usefulness, the one who cleaned up, who covered for her, who held her excuses like they were sacred. And I didn't mind, at least I thought I didn't, until Roger became part of the equation. The first time I noticed the shift, it was so small I almost dismissed it. Diane came over for dinner, dressed like she was headed to a cocktail party, not my kitchen. She complimented Roger's shirt before she complimented the food. She reached across the table for the wine, her hand grazing his wrist just long enough to feel intentional. He pulled back slightly, but she smiled as if she'd planted a seed. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Sisters tease, families blur boundaries. But then I noticed the way her eyes lingered on our house, as if she were taking inventory. Her fingers traced the carved edge of our dining chairs, slow and deliberate, as though she were measuring how it would feel to belong there. She laughed at Roger's jokes a little too loudly, her head tilted just enough to signal interest. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. One afternoon, I overheard her talking to a cousin in the backyard. They didn't know I was standing by the window, curtain drawn halfway, holding my breath. Diane's voice carried, sharp and mocking. "Brenda's marriage? Please. She plays house while Roger dreams of something bigger. She's lucky he hasn't realized it yet." I stood frozen, the fabric brushing my arm. Lucky. As if my life were an accident she should have inherited instead. At a family barbecue not long after, my brother-in-law let something slip, chuckling into his beer. "Diane's always had a thing for what isn't hers. Especially your husband." He laughed like it was harmless, but his eyes flicked away too quickly. Jokes like that aren't jokes at all. When I looked across the yard, Diane was already staring at me. She didn't look away. She didn't even blink. That was her tell. She wanted me to know. wanted to watch the hurt bloom in real time. It hit me then. This wasn't about Roger. Not really. He was just the weapon. This was about me, about dismantling the life I had built, piece by piece, until nothing of it felt mine anymore. I thought back to all the years I'd defended her, the times I'd brushed off her sharp comments, excused her bitterness. How many times had I said, "That's just Diane, don't take it personally"? How many times had I been the shield she didn't deserve? That night, lying awake again while Roger scrolled on his phone, I let the silence settle heavy in my chest. For the first time, it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like strategy. I wouldn't cover for her anymore. I wouldn't soften her edges for the sake of peace. I decided to let her show herself for who she was. All I had to do was step back and watch. Secrets have a way of leaving traces, no matter how carefully someone tries to bury them. With Diane, it was always the little things. The late arrivals, the whispers outside, the quick glance at her phone when she thought no one was watching. I wasn't looking for proof. It found me. One evening, after a family dinner, she left her phone on the counter while she helped clear dishes. A message flashed across the screen, just a few words before it faded. "You promised you'd fix it." The name attached wasn't Roger. It wasn't anyone I knew. Later that week, I passed by Diane's car parked at the corner near the grocery store. She was inside with someone, just a silhouette in the driver's seat. I couldn't hear much, only the edge of her voice, urgent and sharp. "You said this was the last time." "I don't have more." An envelope changed hands. She shoved it quickly into his lap before stepping out, adjusting her smile like nothing had happened. I stayed hidden, my heart pounding. That was all I needed. It wasn't just Roger. There was someone else, someone messy, someone who wanted more from her than she could afford to give. A few days later, my brother-in-law pulled me aside after church. "You didn't hear this from me," he muttered. "But Diane's been mixed up with someone. Guy's trouble. Money trouble." The pieces clicked like shards of glass. Roger wasn't conquest. He was security, insurance, a way to bury whatever mess she'd created elsewhere. I remembered the message on her phone. "You promised you'd fix it." Fix what? A debt? A mistake? Maybe even a pregnancy that wasn't as certain as she wanted everyone to believe. That thought lodged itself in my chest. If the child she claimed was Roger's, wasn't? I didn't confront her. I didn't whisper the suspicion to anyone else. I carried it like a blade in my pocket, sharp and hidden, waiting for the right moment. That night, when Roger came home late again, I didn't ask questions. I simply noted the smell of Diane's perfume on his shirt, the faint trace of something that wasn't mine. Then I folded the laundry, stacked it neatly, and placed it on the bed. Silence isn't absence. Silence can be control. And in that silence, I started to feel the shift. Diane was building her stage, but I was building my case. The night of our anniversary should have been mine. Candlelight, friends, family, every detail arranged to look like celebration. But I had already learned that appearances are weapons in my family, and Diane never missed a chance to sharpen hers. We gathered around the table, glasses catching the glow, plates clattering with polished silver. I smiled where I was supposed to, nodded when people congratulated us on another year together. Inside, I counted the seconds. I knew something was coming, and then it did. Diane leaned back in her chair, one manicured hand resting on her stomach, the other sliding into Roger's as if it had belonged there all along. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice warm, almost casual. Then, with a glance at me, "The family's growing." The room shifted. Gasps, applause, the scrape of chairs as relatives reached to hug her. A chorus of congratulations filled the air, rehearsed as if everyone had been waiting for this moment. Everyone but me. I felt dozens of eyes on me. Waiting. Expecting. This was the part where I was supposed to collapse, cry, maybe even scream. But I didn't. I set down my fork with quiet precision. I reached for my glass, held it steady despite the weight in my chest, and smiled. "To family," I said, "and to the truths we all eventually face." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the room. Diane froze for a split second before forcing a laugh, her hand tightening around Roger's. Roger cleared his throat, muttered something about blessings, but his eyes flicked toward me, wary. I didn't flinch. I watched them, calm, collected, almost serene, because I wasn't blindsided. I had already walked through the fire weeks ago when I found the proof. What they saw as exposure was only confirmation. One of my aunts whispered too loudly, "She doesn't even look surprised." I caught the words, "Let them hang." I wanted Diane to hear them too. And in that moment, it wasn't me under the microscope. It was her. Her smile wavered, her laugh cracked at the edges, and for the first time, I saw her confidence bend. I lifted my glass again, just enough for her to see the reflection of her own fear in my eyes. Silence can humiliate louder than a scream, and mine was deafening. The table hadn't recovered from my first toast when Diane leaned forward, forcing brightness into her voice. "Don't be so dramatic, Brenda," she said, with a laugh pitched too high. "This is happy news. You should be celebrating with us." Her words dripped with victory, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted, searching mine for a crack, a tremor, a single sign that I was unraveling. She wanted me broken, on display, confirming to everyone that she had won. I gave her nothing. I let the silence stretch until people shifted in their chairs. Then I stood, holding my glass again, my voice steady and slow. "To sisters," I said, "the kind who share everything, almost everything." A ripple moved through the table. Forks paused midair. Someone cleared their throat. Another coughed into a napkin. Roger stiffened, his grip on Diane's hand faltering. And Diane, she laughed again, but this time it was brittle, the kind of sound that doesn't reach the eyes. I watched her cheeks flush, her smile stiffen, her shoulders tighten under the weight of everyone's sudden discomfort. She wanted control. I'd given her exposure instead. "You're being cruel," she whispered when the noise returned, leaning toward me as though the words wouldn't travel. But I heard the quiver in her voice, the fear. Cruel? No. Precise. I tipped my glass in her direction, my lips curving just enough. "Funny thing about secrets," I said softly. "They never stay buried for long." Her eyes widened. For a moment, she looked young again. Not triumphant, not untouchable, but cornered. Like a child caught in a lie too tangled to explain. The room moved on without us. Talk of dessert, of photographs, of who should make a speech. But in that pocket of silence between us, I knew I had landed the blow. Not with shouting, not with rage, but with a single, sharpened line that only she could feel cut all the way through. I sat down again, the glass empty in my hand, my face calm. From the outside, I looked composed, gracious even. Inside, I knew I'd shifted the ground beneath her feet. Because silence isn't just absence, it can be control. And that night, in front of everyone who thought I'd fall apart, I learned how powerful that control could feel. Diane's laugh still echoed faintly when the first crack showed. Her hand trembled as she set her glass down, the stem catching the light before tipping just enough to spill wine across the tablecloth. A dark stain spread slowly, like a secret refusing to stay hidden. She muttered something about being clumsy, but her face betrayed her. Too flushed, too stiff. A cousin reached for napkins. My aunt whispered, "Is she all right?" Loud enough for the whole table to hear. I stayed silent, watching. Roger shifted beside her, his jaw tightening as he dabbed at the spill. He didn't look at me, not once. That was his tell. He knew what I knew. And suddenly, the man who had been so bold minutes ago looked smaller, diminished by the weight of my calm. Diane tried to recover, forcing a smile so wide it looked painful. She touched her stomach again, drawing sympathy from the room, but her eyes flicked nervously toward me. I didn't give her a reaction. I only raised my brows slightly, enough for her to read what I wasn't saying. I remembered the message on her phone. "You promised you'd fix it." I remembered my brother-in-law's warning. Guy's trouble. Money trouble. And I remembered the way she had looked at Roger as though he were a lifeline, not a lover. So I leaned in just enough for her to hear, my voice low, deliberate. "Hope you're sure who the father is. You wouldn't want another mess." Her smile vanished. Completely. She froze, her hand slipping from Roger's, her lips parting as though she might deny it. But she didn't. She couldn't. Her silence told the story louder than words ever could. Conversation around us carried on. Someone asking about dessert, another pouring coffee. The world didn't stop. But in the stillness between us, something shifted. The balance of power, the story she thought she owned. It slid quietly into my hands. I sipped from my glass, calm, almost serene, while Diane sat rigid, the stain on the tablecloth spreading wider, darker, impossible to ignore. Her performance was crumbling, and she knew it. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. I didn't storm out. I didn't demand answers. I simply placed my napkin on the table, thanked the host, and walked away. Behind me, I could still hear Diane's voice stretching too thin, Roger's silence pressed tight between his teeth, and the forced laughter of relatives pretending they hadn't just watched something fracture in plain sight. No one followed me. Not Roger. Not Diane. No one ever does. At home, the house was dark. I left the lights off, let the silence spread through the rooms like it finally belonged to me. I poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen counter, and stared at the clock until the ticking slowed my thoughts. My phone buzzed 3 times. One from my mother. Please try to be kind. She didn't mean it that way. One from Roger. We need to talk. Tomorrow. And one from an unknown number. Just a single line that made my stomach turn. She promised she'd fix it. I didn't respond to any of them. Not out of spite, out of choice. Instead, I opened the drawer where I had hidden the papers I'd signed days before. Separate accounts, bills rerouted, a new key I hadn't given Roger. Quiet moves no one had noticed yet. Absence turned into distance, and distance into control. I slipped off my necklace, unclasped my ring, and set them both on the nightstand. The circle of gold caught the streetlight through the window, shining for no one. I realized how small it looked, how light it felt now that I'd stopped believing it meant protection. When morning came, Roger's side of the bed was still untouched. A part of me wondered if he'd show up later with apologies, with explanations rehearsed in front of a mirror. Another part of me, the part that had already buried the marriage quietly in my chest, hoped he wouldn't,